So I'm delighted this evening. I'm spending some time with Thomas Eskebaek from Century Space.
Eskebaek.
So Thomas, I've met you a number of times, both at my own events and at John Corrie's, and John selected you to be one of the speakers this coming Saturday. It's one-day workshop, which he says is not a pitch fest. It's an informative discussion, interaction with some key presenters as well. I was really lucky today to spend time with Stuart Melody, and now I'm really lucky to spend time with you and to hear what your thoughts are on property, the market going forward, and also just give a synopsis of what you'll be presenting about on Saturday, this coming Saturday in Blackfriars, which is the venue is yards away from the Tate Modern, easy access from almost anywhere in the UK because Blackfriars is well connected with National Rail and so forth. Don't need to go into logistics. It's in the centre of town, easy to get to. But Thomas, rather than me give a geographical lesson about Blackfriars, let's get on and really discuss your story on property and how you got involved in property.
Yeah.
And thanks for spending time.
I think, yes, of course. Thank you very much for having me. My story in property started, I'd say, about 3 years ago when my wife and I had our first child. It was definitely a big aha moment. To what we did was we did an analysis of what we would need in terms of financial resources in order to bring children into the world and bring them through the English private school system. And looking at that made us realize that we needed to think about the world a little bit differently. And that was the key driver, the key ignition, so to speak, to get us into property, because we realized that with the costs related to having children and in London in particular, we just needed a different way of doing it. Because yes, you can do it with a salary, but it just means that you won't be spending any time with your children. So therefore, we started to rethink and said, well, how can we do this differently? And that's where property came into the picture for us. As a way of replacing salary income with another type of income, less time-intensive or time-demanding type of income. So we started at that about 3 years ago. I did a lot of research, pretty much read through, I think, 25 or 30 books on the topic. I read through pretty much all property tribes, found that incredibly helpful. And then we started investing in sort of standard buy-to-let properties. And then at the end of last year, I had the opportunity to leave my job and basically decided to go full-time in property from January 2016, and have been spending this past 11 months now really getting things going, and it's been super exciting, super interesting so far.
And Thomas, your background is from companies such as Bain, which is in the top 3 in its sector. Do you want to just explain to the listeners your background, where you've come from, a corporate background?
Sure. I'd say I come from a very mixed background, in the sense that my first thing out of the university was running a software company that I launched from scratch. So I spent 5 years running a software company. Then we reached 2009 and had to raise funding. That was not easy. So I closed down the company and moved into working in an incubator for small high-tech startups, and spent about 2 years there. And then moved on to, wanted to try the corporate world. I worked with very small companies. I wanted to try to work with very large companies. So I joined Bain & Company here in London. And Bain & Company is one of the world's top 3 strategy consultancies, working for FTSE 50 companies pretty much. And has a very strong private equity practice, which means that at Bain & Company I did, Bain & Company still does, a lot of due diligence projects for private equity funds across Europe. And that is some of the skill set that I've taken with me into property and find really, really helpful.
Sure. So in terms of looking at some of the key questions, we were discussing about what software you use to help you in your journey, and far away with what we were discussing in terms of that software. It's quite interesting. You don't want to tell listeners too much about the Stuart interview, but Stuart said WhatsApp, but he looked at a voice message, the voicemail system in WhatsApp. So it's quite interesting. You're not looking at something, I was going to say not sophisticated, but it is sophisticated if you use it to the maximum level. So
Yeah,
far
I
away.
would say that's a good point. I think the first point to understand is that I don't manage my own properties, so therefore I don't have any specific management tools. I have agents managing all my property, and I have a bookkeeper keeping track of all the payments coming in and out. So that's very helpful. And then actually my key tools for property is actually something as simple as Microsoft Excel and Microsoft PowerPoint. Excel asking me to really analyze and organize also my due diligence process, and my modeling and analysis. And then PowerPoint helps me convert that very, very high level or sort of deep analysis into something that I can convey to my investors so that they understand what has been done and what's beneath this project, what's the analysis behind it, and what's the story here. So it's those two, I'd say those two are my primary tools in everything I do related to property. So yeah, I think a lot of people perhaps underestimate the power of those two very well-known tools in terms of how powerful they actually are in terms of doing the analysis you need to do and also communicating the outcomes of those analyses.
And it's quite interesting you talk about Excel, and it's a conversation I had with Richard Thorpe as well, who was talking about Excel, although he also did say there's an opportunity for tech companies to get involved in creating something a little bit more sophisticated in terms of property development. Do you see that opportunity as well, because you come from a software background?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I would say I think yes, there is a basis for, I would say, codifying the development projects into a more templatized type of system. But in reality, for someone like me who's used to working in Excel and used to doing analysis, I think I would almost always go back to Excel, because I want to be able to analyze things the way I want to analyze them. So codifying it might not work in all scenarios. So I would say it's an interesting idea, and I think it could help a lot of people who are not necessarily used to Excel. For someone like me, I would always stick with Excel, I think.
So one of the fascinating questions which I've asked interviewees, and I've had completely different responses, and sometimes it's been, well, let me fire away the question. In terms of the product you've used below £100, which has been valuable, what's been the most valuable product?
I would say something as simple as I have a laser distance measurer that I carry with me whenever I go into a viewing. And it's a very simple product. It costs, I don't know, about 35, 40 pounds. And you can buy it online on Amazon or something like that. But for me, it's incredibly powerful, because it means that whenever I go into a viewing, I can always measure all the rooms without it taking that much longer, which means that when I come out of the viewing, I have a sketch with me. And I found again and again that sketch becomes incredibly helpful, both in terms of thinking about what you can do with the property and actually testing, is there room for a bathroom here? Can you switch this around? Can you fit a kitchen in here? All those things. But also in terms of when you speak to lenders, they will always want to know how big are the rooms, what's the size of the flat, all those things. And when you have the measurements to hand, you can answer those questions easily. But if you don't, you're kind of stuck, and you're dependent either on the agent or someone else going back into the property and measuring it up. So I found it saves me a lot of time, in particular, in a lot of ways. So I'd highly recommend that.
Thomas, in terms of looking at where do you see yourself, maybe not 5 years time, because we can do 5 years if you want, but 12 months or 24 months. And it's interesting, John's theme of his event is 2017. So he's looking from a 12-month perspective. So we can look at 12 months, or we can look a little bit longer. Yeah,
I think in terms of I'd say my sort of 3-year goal, or it used to be my 5-year goal. I've now come far enough that I think I can do it in 3 years, which is great. So my 3-year goal is to basically replace my wife's and my salary income, so that we are independent of no longer trading time for money, essentially. That would be the key one. And then I think during that, or as part of that process, I'll be expanding my business's capacity. So Century Space is my company. I'll be expanding my capacity by adding both more external resources, but also potentially some internal resources. And I'm also looking at potentially raising a small property investment fund, so that I would have committed capital ready to deploy into projects, because we find now that we're seeing a lot of interesting projects, but some of them we simply cannot move on because we don't have the capital to hand, which means that we lose them either because we can't offer quickly enough, or we can't go in there quickly enough. So it's a bit of a catch-22. So therefore, we're looking at options for how we might raise a small fund to basically do some of the deals that right now we have to pass on.
Thomas, so in terms of looking at strategies for beginners, or again, I'm influenced by what Stuart said to me, because he didn't like to use the word beginner, because he says everyone's got value, and it's finding where the value is. It may not be necessarily looking at their property experience, maybe thinking slightly outside of the box. What would you suggest to someone who's new to the market as such, new to the property market?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I actually very much agree with Stuart's sentiment. I haven't heard the interview yet, but definitely agree with his sentiment that everyone has value to add in this space, and it's not rocket science. It is a matter of basically hard work and getting it done, and doing what needs to be done to make it work. In terms of strategy, it's a question that I often run into from a lot of people, because obviously being a strategy consultant in my background, it is a natural point of interest for me. And I myself spent about 4 months at the beginning of this year just figuring out what the right strategy for me would be. So I think it's a very, very crucial question. I think it's a very important question for someone coming into the space to answer for themselves. I also think it's not a question that I can answer for you or for anyone, because it depends so much on where you are now and where you want to go. So I always say when I have these conversations, and I quite enjoy having these conversations and helping people thinking through their strategies, is, well, start with where you want to be. What do you want to get to? What are you trying to achieve here? And once you know where you want to go, then figure out where you stay, do a sort of a self-assessment, figure out where do you stand today, and then you can plot out the course to get there. Because it's infinitely easier getting to where you want to go if you know where that is. Whereas if you don't know where that is, or you have some sort of bleak target of some sort that doesn't really tie into your personal skills and abilities, then it's very hard to navigate the way there. So I would say start with where you want to go, and then think about and really think it through in detail. Really think about, so how does that fit with my personality and what I want to achieve in my life? For me, having true passive income is very important. So therefore, I'm not particularly looking into service accommodation or HMOs, because for me that is running a business, and that's not passive income. That's running a business as opposed to having an asset that pays you an income. So it's very important to really think through all of the details of that question, not just say, oh, I want X amount per month in net profits from my property. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's also interesting you mentioned passive income, and I know there's been a bit of debate on Facebook about what passive income is. Does it really exist? Thomas, I'd love to continue the conversation. One way the listeners can continue the conversation with you is this coming Saturday the 3rd of December. It's the one-day event which John Corrie's organised with yourself, Stuart Melody, EJ Zeroy. Now, I will send a link so people can find out more about that. The key question is, if people want to connect with you, how would you like them to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you can make it to the event on Saturday, that would be brilliant. I think otherwise, you can find me on Facebook, but the easiest way is probably to go to my company website, which is centuryspaces.com. So century as in 100 years, and spaces as in wide open spaces, and then .com. And on there, you'll find my contact information, and you can get in touch with me directly if you on by email or by phone. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
So Thomas, I'd love to continue the conversation. I'm sure we do when we have a slightly better line as well. Possibly maybe we can do a Facebook Live at some point. I definitely appreciate you taking some time out tonight. Huge thanks, Thomas. Huge thanks to the listeners whenever you're listening to this. Apologies for the sound quality. You will have the chance to hear Thomas in perfect sound on Saturday. That's one thing I'd say. And if you're listening after Saturday, at some point, I'm sure we're going to do a Facebook Live or another interview with a better sound check. But I just wanted to make sure we got this video out so you have the options of considering whether Saturday is for you or not. So thanks for taking time out, Thomas. this evening?
I was thinking you asked previously, and if you want to go into that now, I'm absolutely fine with that. You asked what I would be speaking about on Saturday, and I think it's quite. It could be potentially interesting for the listeners to hear about that. But so Saturday's topic is due diligence and how do you actually due diligence a project, and that's something I've spent quite a lot of time on, both in my previous work but also in property work, and it seems to be working very well for my investors to see the due diligence, and that's what I'll be going through on Saturday. So I definitely recommend you check into that.
Okay, huge thanks, Thomas, and huge thanks to the listeners as well.
You're welcome. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.